Is alternate history dead? Is the golden age over? Are we just watching the scraps of a once great but now fallen genre? Today's video will be a bit less structured than usual. As I'm recording this, I'm currently several weeks into finishing the Scar Nicholas audiobook, which might end up being over 3 or 4 hours long, but I still wanted to put something out intermittently. Specifically, I've been wanting to address some thoughts I've had about the alternate history genre over the course of a few years. The purpose of alternate history, whether it's inherently political, why there's so much drama in our community, and whether or not the genre is dying. I've watched this genre grow, at least here on YouTube, over many, many years. First as a passive fan, then as a participant on forums and community websites, and now as someone actually making alternate history content. But what is the purpose of alternate history? If you take even a cursory glance at the alternate history forum online, you'll realize that this question has been hotly debated for years now. Overall, however, the prevailing opinions fall into two camps. Either alternate history is entertainment, meant not to be taken seriously, or it is an academic pursuit, a realistic counterfactual intended to flex the parts of the brain which deal with reasonable prediction, and wherein no room for unrealistic assumptions can ever be allowed. I kind of believe that both of these opinions can be true simultaneously. There are channels like Rewriting History, or Videntis, or older Monsieur Z, which are, by their nature, entertainment content. Their videos had or have a grounding in history, and provide educational value to some degree, but overall, they're meant to entertain. They tell a story, historical fiction, through maps and images and graphics. Myself and millions of people have enjoyed these videos. They take historical figures and countries and things that we recognize and like and put them in cool new settings. That's probably why they appeal so much to people who play video games like Hearts of Iron 4. It's maps, flags, and interesting people doing interesting things. It's entertaining. There are also channels like Possible History or History's Influence, or dare I even say my own, which take a more methodical approach. Something not necessarily academic, but approaching that. We look at the historical record, read through different books or articles or documents, come to certain conclusions about what caused what historically, and then make changes to try to realistically predict what would have happened if something was different. That is more of a study in pattern recognition, in recognizing cause and effect at a grand structural level. And while we, of course, make mistakes and get things wrong and probably often come to conclusions that don't capture the entire picture, and the commenters certainly note this frequently, I think these alternate history scenarios are truly valuable from an educational perspective. They teach real history as they go through the context, and they teach the viewer, slowly with every new video, how to think about history, how to predict events, how to think about causation, and how to think broadly about complicated systems with many, many variables. That's probably a bit of an overbearing way of describing all of it, but to be frank, I think this sort of thought exercise is incredibly useful. By systematically altering one variable, or cluster of variables like I've done in my more recent videos, we test which factors in history were truly decisive. We learn about path dependency, the role of chance, individual agency, and again, these major structural vectors in history. And at the end of the day, no matter if you enjoy this entertaining or this more educational alternate history, through engaging with the content in and of itself, I think I and many of you are learning in a way we otherwise wouldn't have. Because it's simply fun. It's more fun than reading a textbook or taking a class. It's engaging, it turns on your brain, and it makes you actually interact with and ask questions about history rather than just learning trivia. At its core, alternate history is a playground for the mind. It scratches an itch, exploring worlds that diverge from our own. We see what could have been. The best alternate history, I think, personally, is a healthy mixture of both the entertaining and the academic. Videos that are done with a good counterfactual methodology, but whose worlds are still just plain cool. Like our video on the United States joining the Central Powers. Halfway through, we're talking about oil export records and European political trends and bank loans and nitrate fertilizers. All of this minute stuff that you would find in a textbook, and yet the story it tells, the crazy differences from our world, the invasion of Canada, spoiler alert, the Middle Europa project, all of this is still interesting, still entertaining, and frankly just fascinating. Now, to take a bit of a turn then, the next question I've been thinking about is alternate history inherently political? Alternate history has always been politicized. There's no doubt about that. It doesn't matter what you personally think about the various political backgrounds of alternate history YouTubers, personal views tend to seep into the work. And it's not always noticeable, but there are little hints in the framing of historical events, or in the methodology behind the scenario. Well, sometimes it's not so subtle, but it was clear back in the day that people like Monsieur Z and What If Althist weren't usually trying to covertly sneak in their political opinions into their work. They were open about their biases, and they developed audiences who either agreed with them or could put them aside to enjoy the videos, particularly once both moved on to political commentary. But when it comes to alternate history channels that aren't as overtly politicized, you can still pick up clues. Maybe one channel really focuses on people and individual decisions as the crux of their alternate timelines. Perhaps that is an indication then that they subscribe more to the great man theory of history, whether they consciously know it or not. Or suppose it's the other way around, a channel which focuses a lot more on what I call structural vectors and economic trends as the backbone of the scenario. That's an indication that I or some other YouTuber believe that economics and societal trends drive history, and less so individual figures of importance. Neither of these lenses through which one can view history is inherently more or less wrong than the other. They're just that, they're lenses. It's very true that there are historical great men like Napoleon Bonaparte, Julius Caesar, or Alexander the Great who shaped history in their image. And it's also true that there were instances like the build-up to the First World War or to the French Revolution where it was inertia that dictated the sequence of events. Again, as for myself, I think I've done a decent job at keeping my political views hidden, at least in my published work, but they still seep through. For instance, in our video about an isolationist United States during the Cold War, the introduction to which is very clearly anti-interventionist and focuses negatively on American intervention in the Middle East. In our video on the French Revolution, I also take an arguably revisionist stance on Napoleon Bonaparte, arguing that he was a corrective force against the excesses of the Reign of Terror, and that he represented the spirit of enlightened absolutism which Louis XVI attempted to, but could not, through his indecision and inability to override the nobility in the courts, properly embody. But I've also produced videos where I think I do a good job of suppressing my biases. For example, I've made 2 videos on socialist states surviving, which seemingly produce pretty decent outcomes, all things considered, despite the fact that I would not quite describe myself as a fan of socialism or communism. They weren't hit pieces on these historical states, nor on these historical ideologies, and they weren't glowing endorsements either. They didn't emphasize the evils of socialism or something like that. They simply took a look at face value at what went wrong, whether internal or external, attempted to fix that through various historical divergences, and then tried to predict systematically what the world these changes would produce could look like. So perhaps controversially, I would say that yes, while alternate history creators are all going to be inherently biased, alternate history videos don't necessarily have to be inherently political. Again, alternate history is often used as a political tool, whether intentionally or unintentionally. But with the proper methodology, and by treating alternate history as a true thought experiment, we can push to the margin political bias in the pursuit of something more rigorous. The key to all of this is, once again, perspective, lenses. The best example I can give is the build-up to World War I. And maybe my regular viewers will be mad at me for dragging World War I into some other unrelated video once again, but whatever. As the world crept toward the Great War, Germany planned on invading France through neutral Belgium, which gave Britain a reason to join the war. But why did they do that? Russia declared war on Austria-Hungary in defense of Serbia, despite not having a treaty with the Serbs. Why did they do that? Serbia accepted all but one of Austria-Hungary's demands, and yet Austria-Hungary still declared war on Serbia. Why on earth would they have done that? These all feel like easily avoidable blunders, or better yet, good opportunities to blame the escalation of war on the foolishness or even the evil intentions of one country or another. Those evil Germans invaded poor helpless Belgium. Those power-hungry Russians beat up on Austria-Hungary out of their own thirst for war. But if you step into the shoes of each of these nations' leaders, understand the political ideologies that colored their views of the world, the economic issues they were facing, the domestic and foreign political issues they thought were urgent, and at the very least their recent histories, it all starts to make sense. Germany knew France was preparing for war. They knew Russia had been rapidly industrializing. They knew Russia had access to new railways funded by French loans. They built on the precedent of their victory in the Franco-Prussian War. They mistakenly believed Britain would not honor the Treaty of London that guaranteed Belgian neutrality. The formulators of both the Schlieffen Plan and its later modifications calculated that Germany would inevitably have to fight a two-front war against Russia and France that it could not sustain for long. So everything was urgent from Germany's perspective. And so the German General Staff believed they had to knock out France quickly, and that the violation of Belgian neutrality was a military necessity in a desperate race against time and a security dilemma where waiting meant encirclement and eventual defeat. Russia's decision to mobilize and then declare war on Austria-Hungary also makes sense when you consider, first of all, its self-image as the protector of the Orthodox Slavic peoples, but more importantly, its interests in the Balkans. Russia wanted access to the Dardanelles Straits, through which Russian grain, their most valuable export, was shipped to the Mediterranean. Russia also felt recently humiliated by the Russo-Japanese War, the 1905 revolution, the Bosnian annexation crisis, which was when Austria absorbed Bosnia, and their failures to assert their influence during the Balkan Wars. Russian leaders seriously believed that another diplomatic defeat would both discredit Russia as a great power and feed the revolutionary pressures already simmering in the country. Russia needed a war to prove itself, to distract from internal problems, and to reclaim their dominance in the Balkan Peninsula. Economically and militarily, Russia was also modernizing rapidly, but the High Command still believed time was not yet on their side. It was better to fight now, with French support already assured, than later, when Germany might be even stronger. This was the same logic Germany used as they were anxious to fight a Russia before the Russians grew stronger and industrialized further. Both of these powers independently believed it was better to fight the devil you knew now than the devil you didn't 10 years down the line. For Austria-Hungary, the assassination of Franz Ferdinand in Sarajevo also wasn't an isolated incident. It was the latest in a series of crises involving South Slavic nationalism that threatened to tear their multi-ethnic empire apart. Serbia had doubled in size after the Balkan Wars, and the structure of their state and the nature of the various secret nationalist groups across the region made Serbia a magnet for irredentist unrest among the Austro-Hungarian Empire's Slavic populations. Austrian leaders, especially Chief of Staff Konrad von Hotzendorf, already believed they needed a preventative war to crush Serbian ambitions before they grew stronger. So the ultimatum to Serbia was deliberately harsh, intended to provoke that war. Domestic politics also mattered. The dual monarchy was politically fragile, with the Hungarians increasingly serving as a roadblock to Austrian ambitions. A show of strength and a war that they had originally believed would be a minor war confined only to the Balkans was deemed necessary to preserve the empire's prestige. These rulers were not cartoon villains, but they also weren't saints. They were leaders navigating intense structural pressures, and they had incomplete information, unlike us today, who can look back 100 years earlier and see all of the sources we have now. And they also had commitments through treaties, military doctrines optimized for offense, and domestic political incentives that were shaped by the recent industrial revolutions across Europe. So once you understand how to use perspective to understand why countries and figures did what they did, and you can view historical events through different lenses, things just make so much more sense. History becomes less black and white. Heroes and villains become people who were simply doing what they thought was right or necessary, with the information and the views that they had. And that, I believe, is the key to writing good alternate history. Understanding perspective. Okay, with all of that in mind, why is there so much drama in the alternate history community? Some of you might not even remember the Monsieur Z Emperor Tiger Star beef, or that guy Freda who made some dumb videos calling alternate history far-right propaganda, or the Monsieur Z website Civil War, or the Josh Sullivan possible history beef, or what if alt-hists like psychedelic drug-induced crash out. At the end of the day, even though it doesn't seem like it should be a community plagued by drama, that's just the way online communities go. It's trivial and silly, but people want clicks. Hell, I want clicks. I made a video of my own criticizing Alternate History Hub. Of course, that wasn't intended to start drama, and it didn't, luckily. But in many other instances, people's communities take small disagreements and run with them. It's an us versus them mentality, which partially stems from the fact that these online communities are parasocial. the other YouTuber becomes the bad guy, and you can meme things into an actual rift between people who view one channel and people who view another. Luckily nowadays that drama seems to have subsided. All of us YouTubers collaborate and communicate within the community constantly. A commenter here and there might still not like one YouTuber or another for some reason, or maybe they confuse me for Monsieur Z or whatever, but these individual comments aren't relevant. The broader alternate history community, at least now, just seems to have chilled out, which is a nice change of pace for once. However, a few people have also pointed to that as evidence of a more dire situation, and to that I wanted to ask my final question today. Has alternate history died? Are we beating a dead horse making new alternate history videos? And more importantly, has every question already essentially been asked and answered? Well, a good handful of the videos I've published on this channel, or I've seen other channels publish, are subjects that have been covered before, some almost a decade ago, which is crazy to think about because I always considered the golden age of history to be that 2016 to 2020 era. But even though these ideas have been turned into videos before, these new videos aren't copies. They are iterative or brand new theses on classic alternate history scenarios. There's also still plenty of new material to work with. History is massive, and though there is a limit to how many million-view banger videos on popular subjects you can produce, because let's face it, the general audience is only familiar with and interested in scenarios from a handful of major historical events. But beyond that, we're never really gonna run out of questions. I think it is sad to see some of the bigger channels move on to different things, whether it be politics or movie reviews or something, or some that have just slowed or stopped their uploads altogether. But even still, I think we are witnessing the beginning of a new era in alternate history. There are channels like myself, History's Influence, Rewriting History, Lore Dad, and plenty of others who are filling the void that has been left by the relative absence of the bigger channels. With it, they bring new visual styles, new ways of structuring their videos. They bring a mixture of that entertainment and academic alternate history. They fold in video games and lore and come up with unique ideas and collaborate and breathe new life into a pretty saturated but still niche genre. And that, in my opinion, is exciting to see. I think alternate history isn't dying. It's maturing. It's going through a phase right now of transition. And I hope we see more of that. More smaller channels pop up here and there, more people inspired to make their own alternate history, because that's exactly how I got started, and that's exactly what I think is the most fun thing to see in the US of Z community and the alternate history community at large. People are using their brains, they're being creative, and they're learning about history and having fun while doing it. Anyway, that's all I've got for today. Scar Nicholas might be out soon. It's been a real slog to edit through, but I am so excited to share the final product with you all. And as always, if you enjoyed this video or have any particular notes, be sure to leave a comment for the algorithm and subscribe if you want to see more content like this. You can support us by joining our Discord or by becoming a channel member with the join button below. Thanks for your time. This has been the US of Z, signing out.